I'm Mayla Boguslav, and I research researchers. As a researcher, I get this incredible opportunity to advance science and knowledge, and I do not take that lightly. Taxpayers like you fund research, so we owe it to you and ourselves to ensure you can access and understand our new knowledge and findings. Welcome to the Ignorance Podcast, where we learn about current questions in research. I live by the motto, ignorance is bliss, because when you don't know something, it's an opportunity to learn. Let's welcome our guest researcher for today. Please introduce yourself by name only and your favorite thing to do outside of work.
All right. My name is Curtis Friedel, and my favorite thing to do outside of work is farm. My wife and her family and I all have a farm.
What's on your farm?
We have registered Angus cattle primarily, and so we sell cattle to people who want to improve the genetics of their herd. You know, I grew up on a cattle ranch in Nebraska, and my wife grew up on a cattle farm. As they say, there's a difference between ranches and farms. Ranches are out west, and farms are, more eastern. But so she grew up with cattle, and it was something we decided to do early in our marriage. And we have kids, and they enjoy the farm too. They got some sheep now that they're showing, but the farm primarily is focused on raising what we say elite genetics for other herds and people to increase the genetic profile of their herds.
Very cool. So what questions excite you in your work? What questions are you currently pursuing?
That is a great question. So a lot of my research is built off of adaption and innovation theory, which is a problem-solving theory that indicates how we each have this innate dimension of our personality of how we prefer to solve problems, and that's more adaptively or more innovatively. So we could put this dimension of personality on a continuum, flanked by anchors, adaption, and innovation. So we can measure this very well with this thing called the KAI, which is a tool to measure your problem-solving style, because we're all problem solvers, right? So we're all solving problems, everything from when you choose what to wear for the day to the road you pick to get to point A to point B, or complex problems like climate change, food insecurity, healthcare, all those types of things. What we know from now 50 years of published research, people are either more adaptive or they're more innovative on this continuum. It's a normal distribution curve. Scale ranges between 32 and 160 with a mean at 95. And that's held true across nationalities, cultures, ethnicity, different statuses, ages, and so on, generations. And people who are more adaptive are individuals who approach ideas more cautiously, and because of that, they might be viewed as having fewer ideas. They tend to think about logistics and practicality, inside the box thinking, if you will. And if a system is broke, they might prefer to tweak it to make it more efficient. And they have more regard for group conformity and group cohesion. And we contrast that with the more innovative. Innovators are individuals who generally have more ideas, and they are focused a little bit inside the box and outside the box, because they're less aware of that box when they're generating ideas. And if a system is broke, they might prefer swapping it out with a different system. Revolution instead of evolution, if you will. And have less regard for that group conformity, group consensus. And what we know from this continuum is with a standard deviation of 18 points, at 20 points, we begin seeing the potential for conflict. And so when we're talking about teams working together, people working together, groups, we're able to look at the cognitive diversity of the team and predict where there could be potential conflict. And so the research that's getting me real excited right now is what's happening with artificial intelligence, because now we have a computer's now thinking, and that raises several questions, like beyond the capacity of artificial intelligence to problem solve, are we able to get artificial intelligence agents or bots or whatever we call them, LLMs, to think more adaptively or more innovatively in responding to that request or prompt that you've given them as an end user. And so there's that. There's also looking at, are we coping, and by coping I mean operating outside of our preferred style to work with artificial intelligence. And now we're hearing of people getting different AI agents to work together as teams. So we're working as a team with an AI agent, but we're also having AI agents interact with each other. And so as they're thinking more adaptively and more innovatively, is there conflict there? And what does that even look like? So all kinds of questions like that. And I mentioned that this innate dimension of our personality, we believe we can measure it pretty early in life. And Dr. Kirton, who developed the theory, believed it is genetic. However, he was never able to prove that. And so one study we're looking at right now is, do identical twins have the same innate dimension of their personality, being more adaptive or more innovative along this continuum?
Yeah, so there's a lot in there to unpack with the KAI, or this preferred problem solving style. I guess I would love you to speak a little bit to why it matters. Why do I care about my preferred problem solving style? Why do I care what style AI has? How does that affect me?
It's interesting how people will complete the KAI to learn their problem solving style and how much insight it gives them. And it's important to understand that this has no relationship with intelligence or motivation or family upbringing. It's this dimension of one's personality. And so once we understand what it is and name it and recognize it and even be able to predict it in our behavior in the future, we now know it's not related to our intelligence, so it's not judgmental. I'm not doing this type of behavior because I have less motivation or less intelligence or what have you. It's part of who I am as a creative individual. And so recognizing that is very life-changing for some people, because once they recognize that in themselves, they can recognize it in other people and be able to meet the needs of another person based off their type of thinking. So to your point about this whole idea of understanding self, I'll tell you a story. I gave the KAI to students in my class, and one student in particular received her results and sort of checked out of class for a while. And I thought that was odd, so I invited her to my office and we talked, and she was explaining her behavior, and she had a very extreme score. And she was explaining her behavior as, well, this is who I am because I am an only child. And she now learned that, well, yeah, she is an only child, and that does affect some of her behaviors. And it changed all the furniture in her brain of how she thinks, about herself and what that means for her and how she works with other people. And so it was just really, it jarred her so much that she really had to take time to reflect on that. And so if we're able to help people better understand themselves with that kind of insight, I think that could be really powerful.
Yeah, so it sounds like the question is, how do we help people understand themselves and how they work in relationships to better work with others, right? I think that's the other power of this, that if you're somebody who is more on that adaptive side, is very thoughtful, is very detail oriented, is very careful about what they say, that's super useful in many circumstances, but also has its disadvantages, right? And sometimes it can come off as really stubborn to those who are the opposite. And then if you're more innovative in this continuum, you're somebody who kind of just throws out ideas and just wants to get started and doesn't always see the rules that are around you. And the adaptive people can think, you just want to break everything, right? You're very frustrating too. And so I think, something to me that I love about this KI and the power of it is it really helps us understand each other better, and that it's not malicious, to your point. And because it's innate and because it's really stable throughout our lifetime, taking this test, very quick test once, really gives you a lot of knowledge about who you are and how you show up in the world. Can you say a little bit more about coping behavior and why that is such a problem for us that causes conflict as well and tension in relationships?
Yeah. So the KAIs we've been talking about measure your preferred problem-solving style. And part of adaptation innovation theory is that you can choose to operate outside of this style, to operate more adaptively or more innovatively than your preference. And so what that means is I can turn on and off like a light switch. And I notice when I need to solve a problem that might require more adaptation, more innovation, I can turn on my coping behavior to solve the problem as needed because we can start thinking about problems as well. We need it to solve that problem at a certain capacity, but we also need to consider what the nature of the problem is and what might be required to solve it, more adaptation or more innovation. It's also fueled by motivation. And so if I'm motivated, I have more ability to operate outside of my style and cope. And then when the motivation's gone, I revert back to my preferred problem-solving style. So we do that with problems, but we also do that with people. So if someone's more adaptive or more innovative than me, um, I would cope to meet them maybe in the middle or maybe where they're at. So I can cope at varying degrees along the continuum, and that's challenging. I need more motivation to be able to do that. I have to see the reward in doing that. Um, but if I see the reward, I'm more willing to do it and make that happen.
Yeah, and so it takes energy. And so sometimes also conflicts arise because I'm coping and it's just taking so much energy and I'm just tired. So, with all of this, how do you hope to impact the world?
Well, Dr. Kirton, who originated the theory in the 60s and 70s, um, wrote in his book, the goal is to reduce conflict and improve collaboration. And I think that's the end goal with all of this. So with this work, I want to be able to reduce conflict and improve collaboration. Um, with that, increase mutual respect and humility in that process. And uh, I think for me, and this is something I've always wanted to do, is help people learn to disagree without being disagreeable. And so what's really beautiful about adaptation innovation theory is we can now start looking at how people think and think differently, and we can measure it very well. And we can attribute our conflict to that specific thing. All right. So we can attribute our conflict to how we prefer to think. And once we name that, we now know when we think about diversity that our conflict isn't about being in a different race or being a different nationality or being a different status or whether it's rank status at work or social economic status, uh, and those diversities are all important, and we can have conflict because of those things, and those things shape our point of view. But what gets left out of there is this idea of cognitive diversities and that style, and and we tend to get in trouble when we blame the wrong diversity for the source of our conflict. That's when we start having prejudice and issues of bias. So if we can better name the correct diversity that's causing the conflict, we can, I think, improve collaboration.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think what's also hard is a lot of the diversities that we tend to name, we can't do anything about, right? I can't change my race. I can't change my gender. It just is who I am. And, we say that also that solving style is who I am. But what's nice about it is it tells you a little bit more about me. And it tells me about me to say, like, this is just how I prefer to approach a problem. It's not because I don't want to see it your way. This is just how I naturally see this problem. And if we're seeing a different problem, it makes total sense that we're having a conflict. There's just an immediate issue if we can't even agree on really what the problem is. And I think a lot of our problems today actually stem from that. I really think of problems as questions, like what's the question I'm really trying to ask? And a theory of mine is if we can really nail that question correctly. And then I think if we can nail the evaluation, how do we know we've answered that successfully in some way? Or how do we know that it's not answerable for whatever reason? I think the rest will fall into place. And we don't spend enough time on either of those two things, right? What is really the question I'm trying to ask? Does everybody actually agree on that? Does everybody understand that with the people I'm working with? And then how do we know we're successful?
Yeah, yeah. And Dr. Kirton would talk about that, and he would say, well, first we have to have a shared problem that we all agree to solve, and there has to be some agreement on the process to solve it, and that's what you're outlining. And he would also say that we have to. It sounds so simple, but we have to agree to work together. First our first task is, do we agree to work together? Because if not, then there's two other options. We could ignore each other because I'm not useful to you and you're not useful to me, or we could compete against each other. And competing, draws up resources, and then we start getting winners and losers, and that's not always helpful in a team when you're trying to solve problems together.
Yeah, I completely agree. So clearly, Dr. Curtin has influenced you. Are there other people that have influenced you around KAI and just thinking about these questions?
So we have a teaching team that works together in teaching people how to use the KAI in an accreditation course, and I've learned from them so much. Drs. Priscilla Wulff, Dr. Megan Seibel, and Dr. James Anderson, they keep teaching me because we think about questions and problems, and they've provided so much insight to me. And I think people just I run into, the theory still speaks in ways when I just meet typical people or people using it and telling me about it. I learn from everybody. I don't stop learning.
Yeah, I totally agree. And something I love about research is that in general, our minds are really wired to keep constantly learning and keep constantly questioning and being curious. So I completely agree and say thank you to all these people that we constantly are learning from and are influencing us.
Yeah. And graduate students. I can't let out the graduate students.
Right. So this also, like with graduate students, somebody new to something doesn't really have a box to think in the same way that kind of somebody who's been in a field for a long time. So I always love the new kind of fresh perspectives that students always bring to information and thought at large too. Yeah. So we were talking a little bit about evaluation, right? Or this process of how you go about solving a problem. So how do you know if you've been successful at your work and as a researcher? What is your evaluation criteria?
That is a great question. I'm not really an evaluator. I would say, for me, it's about still being relevant. So if people are still contacting me with questions about the theory, or people are still coming to the accreditation course, I would say as long as people still keep coming to me with questions and insights or aha moments, or want to be part of this community using the KAI in their work, then we're successful.
I like that a lot, right? This idea of relevance.
Yeah, it's more of a qualitative approach maybe than a quantitative metric.
Yeah, but what's nice about it is that it doesn't matter who you are, right? You could be relevant to many different populations. So it could be student focused, it could be work focused, it could be research focused, it could be outside of the research world. So yeah, actually this idea of relevance is really interesting. And I don't think anyone has brought it up so far as a evaluation criteria in some of my conversations. Yeah. So with all of this, what has been your most surprising result?
So there's been a lot of questions about one's problem-solving style and how that might connect to neurodiversity and specifically autism. And so I advised my master student Abby Cheng in doing this research to look at to see if there's a relationship between problem-solving style and being autistic. And I'll say it was interesting because first off, it seems like there's lots of different definitions of autism out there. Um, there's people who will say, well, this is how autism is manifested in me. It may be different for you. And so as a scientist, it's like I'm not seeing a lot of precision there. It still seems very nebulous. So we didn't really know what we were going to get going in. Like a lot of times we do research, we sort of have an idea based off theory and what we know that what could happen. But for this study, for Abby's thesis, we really didn't know what was going to happen. And so we had autistic individuals and we gave them the KAI. And what we found was people who were autistic in general were more adaptive, which makes some sense because, we tend to think of autistic people with lots of focus and this view of looking at efficiency and going deep into a content area with great specificity. But then what's really interesting is there's a subscale in the KAI talking about rule group conformity, which is this idea of how do I work with rules, uh, my regard for group process, group consensus, group conformity. And what we found is autistic individuals tend to score more innovatively on that subscale than what we might expect, which makes some sense, right? Because if you read about people who are autistic, they have that, for lack of a better word, stereotype. So it's like autistic individuals are very focused, maybe perhaps introverted, very detail oriented, very efficient, but they have challenges with working with people. And so that challenge, I think, is for these autistic individuals not being aware of the structures that they need to work with people. That they either overlook them or not aware of them, and so that's giving them problems in the office with their supervisors and people they work with, and maybe people who report to them. And so my hope is that we could better educate individuals from the study about, okay, this is how you prefer to solve problems, and this is how we can work with that and help you be more effective, more successful in your career.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And to empower somebody to actually be able to talk about that and figure out like what's the best work setup is really amazing, right? Both from the perspective of themselves, but also thinking about what job they need to walk into, and what they can ask for in relation to accommodations or just how to be successful in their job at large. All of us have things that we ask for in jobs, no matter what our cognitive abilities are. And so, yeah, that's really, really interesting to think about in general.
Yeah, and of course, we did have innovative individuals who are autistic in the sample. We're not putting people in the boxes by any means. And looking at the previous research of other authors and scientists, this was also why it was a bit of a surprise. We didn't know what we would find because there seems to be also a connection between autism and ADHD. Like a lot of people have autism also have ADHD, and it seems to be more expressed in males. And what we found was we did not see much of a difference between male and female in this. And now we did not ask anyone or indicate in any way if they also had ADHD. But we do know from another study that there is a relationship between those who are more innovative and have ADHD. And so that's why we really weren't certain what we're going to find here, but the findings seem to make sense. Of course, we got to keep researching this, replicate it with different groups, and see if we continue finding the same thing.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to hear the updates on the results as you keep diving into it.
Yeah.
So kind of another side of this coin is, what is your favorite disagreement?
So this may be quite a tangent. And this is a wonderful question, but this actually relates to my work on the farm. So there's this research out there that shows that cows contribute to climate change, and that is completely unnerving to me for several reasons. And um, you know, first off, if you look at this from a historical perspective, we had buffalo and bison, all over the plains eating grass and creating methane. And so that's not changed. So, before we've had buffalo, now we have cattle, all of them producing methane for, centuries. And then the other thing is we really don't have a cow problem because what most people do not know or understand is grass decomposing produces the same amount of methane as cows eating the grass, digesting it, and then producing methane. So you could argue we don't have a cow problem, we have a grass problem. Now, the cows speed up the process, but the research shows that they're roughly equivalent the same amount of methane being produced from decomposing grass as there is from cattle. But cattle are getting the blame, and there's some research out there looking at can we produce um, cattle that produce less methane, and that's really problematic because if you talk to all these farmers and ranchers who work with cattle and they're doing selective breeding, they know if you're breeding for one particular trait, you might lose other traits. We can't ever get the perfect cow, right? And so for example, if we increase carcass traits for more marbling, more ribeye area, that kind of thing, we start losing fertility. And so if we fix one thing, we could be creating another problem. We always have spin-off problems. Every time we have a problem, we have a spin-off problem. And even Dr. Kirton would talk about that. And he would also say sometimes it's better to live with the problem you have than to fix it and have a spin-off problem that you don't want.
Interesting. Now I'm really thinking about this grass problem. I guess I've never thought about what happens when grass decomposes in terms of methane. I think the hard part also is we just don't know. Like there's so many variables that could be at play in all of these issues that it's really, really hard to know what's actually happening. So yeah, it's interesting, right? That like you're very passionate about the farm animals, right, from this disagreement perspective. And so maybe I'm curious, like, why is that not your research area? Why are you not kind of figuring out the farm cattle problem? Or just in general, if you're trying to create really good genetics for cattle, right, why is that not just kind of your full-time job in relation
Yeah.
to that?
Yeah. Sometimes I don't know which one's the gig and which one's the the one that pays the bills. No, I mean we're just very passionate about being on a farm. We find that being on the farm is important to our family. Some people do sports, some people do music. We farm, and it is a passion. That's a great question. I grew up around cattle, and so it's always been a part of me. There was a time where this intersected. So we were working on some climate change stuff in our college because I'm in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and I was invited to a climate uh, science conference to talk about adaptation innovation theory. And the idea was, can we help farmers adapt better practices for climate resilience? So they're really interested in my work, and I learned a lot from hearing them talk about their work in climate science and how they test the climate models, and I don't envy them at all. It is hard work to predict the weather. I think that's why there's so much distrust with climate scientists, is because, well, the weather app still can't tell me what's going to happen tomorrow, right? And so you're telling me this is happening years or decades down the road. What I learned was, being at this climate science convention, is I feel like the scientists had more skepticism in their models than what you would hear from popular press. That they understood the faults of the models and they're working to improve them. I think we tend to underestimate how powerful Mother Earth is in regenerating itself, and being able to take a few punches and still be this fruitful place for us to live.
It's interesting, like an overlap in general and just how hard it is to predict the future. Like on some level, what your work in the KI theory is about kind of the past. It's like, who are you? And based on your experiences, how you've existed in the world up to this point, we can tell you a little bit how that we think this will affect you going forward, but it's really about your past. Whereas, the climate science world is really about the future. And just in general, predicting the future in any type of sense is just really difficult. And it's very easy to be wrong. And it's very easy to see when you're wrong, right? Everyone just knows that you're wrong. And so I think that just itself is a really, really hard problem. Your point about, Mother Earth being able to take punches is really interesting. And it reminds me that, I think why people are also freaking out about climate science, or just climate change at large. Number one, there is a big change, right? People are feeling the change with, less winter and hotter seasons and other things that are having big effects on our lives, right? And we're all kind of instant gratification people. So, that matters to us now, no matter what's happening in the future. But also, we know in science that dinosaurs went extinct, or the world has had these extinct periods or these extreme weather periods. And so I think, there's also some precedent to say something bad could happen. To your point about how the climate scientists are more skeptical, you think, than the popular press, part of the goal of this podcast is to showcase that scientists aren't actually totally dealing in facts. What does a fact even necessarily mean? And personally, I actually don't believe in facts, because I think, science changes for the world, not the other way around. When we think facts are changing, what's really happening from the research perspective is I ask a question, I get some answers. And then as the researcher, what excites me with getting some answers is the new questions I can ask. And when I ask those new questions, I may find something totally different that contradicts what I found before, because I'm diving in a different way into this question. And I think just in general, our science communication is just very poor. And even scientists don't know how to really communicate the certainty or uncertainty of what we do. But we learn in a PhD, when we get a PhD and when we're continuing in research, we really learn what we know and what we don't know. And I think ideally we need to be honest about those things.
Yeah. To think about getting a PhD and doing research is there's recognizing what you know, but then I think we have to be an expert in what we don't know. We've learned so much, in this period of a scientific revolution of, the past few decades, and we continue to learn and grow all the time. But we still know very little about this earth and human interaction and all the variables that we're very sophomoric in our interpretation of science. And I was just thinking as we were talking, I did write this article. So Dr. Kirton was aware at the time I was doing some of this climate science connection at this climate science conference, and he was reminding me of that there was some time in Greenland around the 1400s when the Vikings were there and the Inuit were there, and all of a sudden the Vikings left, and it was Diamond who wrote about this in a book called Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed. And what we're looking at is on average, were the Vikings and the Inuit more adaptive or more innovative in how they operated? So not so much as individual problem solving style, but as a climate, as a culture, were they operating more adaptively or more innovatively as a source of values and process? And it is related to the 1400s when the Earth cooled, I think 7 degrees in the course of about 100 years or so. So some comparatively rapid cooling in that time, and so what happened based off how they lived, how they hunted, how they fished, and gardened, and so on, and why the Vikings left.
Yeah, it's interesting, right, to speculate all these different things. You're kind of in this interesting dichotomy of, the KI work, you really believe there's some good out of that. Whereas there's complications in kind of the cattle world of different people believe different things. So yeah, it's very interesting what types of problems we're comfortable with and where our passions really lie in that space.
So much of it is values driven, and which is also a source of a lot of disagreements. And we tend to want to align ourselves with our values. And to, I think, bring all this together, I'm reminded of a quote that Dr. Kirton would say. He would say, "I'm not resistant to all change. I'm just resistant to your change. My change is perfectly fine. If I could rule the world and just enact my change, I have no problem. But your change that you're trying to instigate is problematic to me." And I started connecting that to science because I think in this world where we tend to discount science that does along with our values, I think that's the key, because I think, in a way, we're all scientists. We're all trying to predict the future based off what we observed, and in making those predictions, we get a better grasp of reality. And in that science, it's that I am not opposed to all science. I like my science very much. I just don't like your science because it is not aligned with my values.
Yeah, it's interesting and leads me really nicely to my last question. If you could do anything not limited by grants or other factors in your space, what would you be doing? What is your vision for the world? So what are your changes that you would like to make?
So if I could not have to worry about a paycheck, um, I remember this question being asked early in my career, and I think I would write. I would just start writing books, or I always thought it'd be neat to own a newspaper, and just get the news out, because I think with this theory now, of course, I wasn't fully aware of this theory when I was young in my career, but now I am. There's so many connection points with current events that I think we can start having conversations about what is a change we really need, and start having conversations about the change on the merit of the advantages and disadvantages of that change, as opposed to who came up with the change. Because most of the time, the conversation is who came up with the idea for the change, and that is determining if it's a good change or a bad change. But let's evaluate the idea and the change on its own merit. And so just being able to write more about that, and tying this back to coping behavior, Dr. Curtin would always go back to this idea of mutual respect, that I respect you, and you respect me. And I would add there, we need more humility in this whole process and all of science. So, mutual respect is recognizing I have advantages and disadvantages in how I think, and you have advantages and disadvantages in how you think, but we can respect each other for that, and get along better for that, and work together because of that. Humility is this idea of I'm not better than you, and so because of that, I can ask you to cover for my disadvantages in how I think, because I need you and you need me. And as you know, with the science of teams, the science is so complex. We can't do it alone. We need teams. The age of one person having all the answers is gone. We need to be able to work with teams for these complex problems. And so the vision of the world is just a whole lot more mutual respect and humility.
Yeah, I love those both. I totally agree with you. I think everyone deserves respect. I think you do need to earn trust, and we need to build trust. And I think those are different. But on the base level, we're all human. And then with humility, there's some really nice work showing that it can be hard to be humble individually because we just don't always know what we don't know. But actually, collective humility is much easier. And that's a way that we can move forward. And, when we're in groups, people don't shy away from necessarily saying, actually, I don't think you're right. It's a little bit easier to have that give and take, ideally in a respectful way, than, saying that to yourself. It's easier to edit somebody else than to edit ourselves.
Yeah. And maybe admit that we're wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Completely agree. We all make mistakes, and the best leaders are ones that actually admit that they make mistakes and do something about it, because it showcases the humility, it showcases the respect for the humans, and it showcases that everyone makes mistakes and you need to just do something about that, right? It's okay to make a mistake. So I completely agree. And I'm excited to hopefully see that vision for the world at some point. Yeah. Last question. What has changed in your life because of your research? What do you pay attention to more because of it?
Hmm. So I would say I am a better spouse and a better parent because of this work. So my wife is a different style than I do, so it's recognizing her needs given what's happening in her life and what she might need to maybe not operate outside her style. So she needs to go. She she used all of her motive, so she's reverting back to her style, and I can understand that, meet that, and help her support her. And also parenting kids. So my kids are younger, um, 6 and 8 right now, a daughter and a son, and one's more adaptive, one's more innovative. I've known that from probably about a year. I haven't given them the KAI because it's you wouldn't be able to give it so early in life, but just on my observations of their behaviors and how they think, one's more adaptive, one's more innovative, and just being able to recognize that, well, one, this is not related to their intelligence. They're both very capable, very smart, and what they may need to operate better and learn better about themselves. So, like for example, the more adaptive one, my son's always calling family meetings. It's so funny. He says we have to have family meetings. So we all get together and decide this, and so the group conformity in him is strong in this one, and my daughter just has lots of interest, more innovative, and yeah, it's really exciting to see them grow and understand themselves.
Yeah. One of my theories with this question in general is that as researchers, we have to care about our work. And so, when you're diving super deep into a question, it impacts you in some way, right? And so it's really lovely to hear that it's impacting you in your relationships and making them better. So I'm sure your wife and your children appreciate it in general. And hopefully you get a similar thing back too from them understanding you better as well.
Yeah, and I've learned not to use the scientific terms, you know. So it's more the practical, like, oh, attention to detail. Oh, let's have a process, or oh, we're talking too much about the details.
Yeah, for sure. So with that, please introduce yourself. Please say your name, your job title, and your field, and anything else you'd like to share.
Yeah, name is Curtis Friedel. I'm an associate professor at Virginia Tech and also director of the Center for Cooperative Problem Solving. And my field is leadership. And thanks for having me.
This podcast is hosted by me, Mayla Boguslav, and produced and edited by Joshua Mendel. To learn more about this episode's guest and any cited or named people, take a look at the episode description. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ignorance Podcast. Please follow the Ignorance Podcast wherever you get your podcasts to learn about science through research questions.